The night the storm tried to kill him was the same night Thorn Mason's past came roaring back to life. Thunder didn't just crack, it tore the sky open. In the flickering, violent light, the old barn looked like a skeleton. Inside, Thorn knelt in the muck and straw, his arms buried to the elbows in the bloody sacred work of birth. Rain hammered the tin roof like a war drum, a frantic rhythm for a frantic heart. "Come on now," he whispered to the heaving cow, his voice a rough sound in the chaos. "Just one more push." The animal screamed, a sound of pure agony, and Thorn's hands shook. It wasn't the cold, though a bitter chill seeped through the walls. It was the date. 10 years. An entire decade since he'd buried Catherine, since she'd left him with a son too young to understand, and a newborn daughter who would never know her mother's face. With a final shuddering heave, the calf slid free. Thorn worked fast, his movements sure and practiced. He cleared the newborn's airways, rubbed its tiny chest, and didn't stop until he felt the first shaky, miraculous breath. He sat back on his heels, the storm in his memories swirling around him. The mother cow, exhausted but alive, began to lick her baby clean. "Welcome to this world," Thorn whispered, his voice raw. "It ain't kind." And as if to prove his point, lightning struck nearby, a blinding flash followed by a crack of thunder so loud it shook the very foundations of the barn. The new mother panicked. Her eyes rolled white, and before Thorn could even think to move, she slammed her weight into him. He felt a sharp, blinding explosion of pain as his head hit the stall wall. Wood splintered. He slid to the ground, a warm, sticky river of blood trickling from his forehead into his eye. The universe had a sick sense of humor. Another blow, right on the anniversary of the day he lost everything. "Fitting," he slurred to the shadows in the rain. "Damn fitting." He staggered through the downpour, the faint light of his cabin a distant, wavering promise. As he got closer, the door creaked open, framing a silhouette against the warm light inside. It was Luke, his 14-year-old son, holding a rifle like he was born with it. The boy already had the look of a man who'd had to guard his world for too long. "Pa!" Luke's voice was tight with alarm, the rifle lowering just a fraction as he recognized his father's stumbling gait. Then his eyes locked on the blood. "What happened?" "New calf," Thorn grunted, pushing past him into the cabin and shaking rain from his coat. Mother wasn't too grateful for the help. Luke didn't say another word. He just set the rifle down and went for the medical supplies. He was just a boy, but he knew how to patch up a man. Out here, necessity was a cruel and efficient teacher. Thorn sank into a chair by the hearth, the glowing embers doing little to warm the chill in his bones. Across the room, 9-year-old Grace sat on the floor, lost in a world of paper and charcoal. She was small and quiet, with eyes that had seen too much nothing. She glanced up, registered her father's presence, and went back to her drawing. Luke came back with a damp cloth and started cleaning the gash on Thorn's forehead. His touch wasn't gentle, but it wasn't rough either. It was just capable, like everything else about the boy. "Gonna need stitches," Luke said, his voice flat. Thorn just nodded, wincing as the cloth met raw flesh. "Then do it." Luke threaded a needle with a steady hand that no 14-year-old should possess. No child should be this good at sewing up a wound, Thorn thought. But then, no child should have to grow up without a mother in a place like Willow Springs. As Luke worked, the fever that had been lurking in Thorn's bones all day took hold. Sweat beaded on his brow, and the room started to swim. The past and present blurred, the face of his son melting into memories he'd tried to bury for a decade and a half. "Elizabeth," he murmured, his eyes half closed, the name slipping out like a ghost. "Please, forgive me." Luke's hand froze, the needle hovering mid-stitch. A storm of emotions flashed across the boy's face. Concern, suspicion, and something that looked a lot like anger. "Who's Elizabeth?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Thorn blinked, trying to drag himself back from the fevered haze. "No one," he lied, his voice weak. "Just the fever talking." Luke held his gaze for a long moment, searching, before he went back to his work, his jaw set like stone. The only sounds in the cabin were the crackle of the fire and the soft scratch of Grace's charcoal on paper. When Luke was done, He stepped back. "Should hold," he said. "Thank you, son." Thorn leaned his head back, letting the darkness pull at him. Just as he was about to slip under, a tiny hand pressed a folded piece of paper into his. He forced his eyes open. It was a drawing from Grace, a woman's face sketched with the innocent, clumsy lines of a child, a face Grace had only ever heard described. "Catherine. Tomorrow's better, Pa," Grace whispered, the most he'd heard her say all day. He wanted to believe her, but as the fever finally dragged him into unconsciousness, he knew tomorrow was just another day for the past to find him. Willow Springs wasn't a town. It was a scar on the face of the desert. It had a general store, a saloon, a church, and a sheriff's office, all of them baked and bleached by the sun into the same shade of dusty gray. Thorne rode in the next morning, his hat pulled low to hide the fresh stitches. The town was mostly dead, but a small crowd had gathered in the square, their laughter sharp and ugly. He tied his horse outside the general store, his gut telling him to mind his own business. But a dark curiosity pulled him forward. Mrs. Porter, the shopkeeper's wife, saw him coming. Her face, already sour, tightened. "Mr. Mason," she said, her voice like grinding stones. "Supplies?" He handed her his list. Flour, coffee, salt, ammunition, the essentials for survival. As she gathered his things, she shot a look of disgust toward the crowd in the square. "Disgraceful," she muttered under her breath, "selling human beings like they're cattle." Thorne's head snapped up. "What was that?" Mrs. Porter sniffed, a sound full of moral superiority. "3 Apache women. The military dragged them in. Sheriff Blackwood claims they're hostiles, but it's just an excuse to fill his pockets, if you ask me." A cold dread settled in Thorne's stomach. He paid for his goods and walked toward the square, drawn by a force he couldn't name and didn't want to examine. An auctioneer stood on a makeshift platform. Beside him, 3 women stood bound at the wrist. Their feet were bare and caked with the dirt of a long journey. Their faces were grim, but their heads were held high. One stood tall and defiant, her eyes burning holes in the leering crowd. Another stared into the distance, her face a mask of such profound grief it looked like it was carved from stone. The third, the youngest, watched the crowd with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. $6 for the lot," the auctioneer yelled, his voice cutting through the jeers. "Who'll start the bidding at a measly $6? The crowd just laughed, shouting crude suggestions. Thorne's hand clenched around his sack of flour, his knuckles turning white. Then the youngest woman spoke. Her voice was clear, her English perfect. "One day you will all answer for this." The crowd fell silent, stunned. Something about that voice. It was a half-forgotten song from a life Thorne no longer lived. The auctioneer, furious at the interruption, slapped the woman hard across the face. "Shut your mouth, savage!" he snarled. He turned back to the crowd. "I said $6. Who'll give me $6 for 3 strong workers?" And before he even knew he was going to do it, Thorne heard his own voice cut through the silence. "I'll pay the 6. Every head in the square turned to him. The weight of their stares was a physical thing. He could feel their judgment, their amusement, their contempt. Across the square, Sheriff Blackwood, who had been leaning against a post, straightened up. A jagged scar that split his left cheek seemed to twist as his face contorted in a sneer of recognition. His hand drifted down, resting casually on the butt of his gun. "Mason," Blackwood said, the name dripping with venom. Thorne ignored him, his eyes locked on the auctioneer. $6, he repeated, his voice like stone. The auctioneer, surprised by the lack of a bidding war, just shrugged. "Sold," he grunted, "for $6. As Thorne stepped forward, he finally allowed himself to look at the women. The tall one glared at him with pure hatred. The grieving one didn't look at him at all. But the third one, the one who had spoken, her eyes met his. They lingered for a second on the new scar above his brow, and for a fleeting moment, he saw something flicker in their depths. Recognition? It was impossible. He handed over $6 silver, a price so insulting for 3 human lives it made him sick. As he did, someone in the crowd yelled, "What are you going to do with a Mason? Start your own tribe?" The crowd roared with ugly laughter. The auctioneer cut the women free and shoved them toward Thorn. "They're your problem now." Thorn reached out to steady the grieving woman as she stumbled, but she flinched away from his touch. "This way," he said quietly, gesturing toward his wagon. The woman who had spoken studied him, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Why?" she asked, her voice low but clear. The crowd quieted, eager to hear his answer. Sheriff Blackwood watched, his eyes narrowed slits of malice. Thorn met her gaze. "Not here," he said. "At the farm." She held his look for a moment longer, then gave a single sharp nod. She started walking toward the wagon, and the other two followed. As they passed the sheriff, Blackwood spat in the dirt near their feet. 15 years, he hissed, his voice low enough for only Thorn to hear. 15 years ain't long enough to forget what you are, Mason. The old wound in Thorn's side, a souvenir from a forgotten war, began to throb. "Likewise, Blackwood," Thorn replied, his voice just as low, just as cold. "I remember exactly what you are." The sheriff's hand twitched, but he didn't draw. Instead, a cruel smile spread across his face. "You just made a mistake," he whispered. "A bigger mistake than you can possibly imagine." Thorn turned his back on him and walked away. Some fights weren't worth having, not yet. He led the women to the wagon, the eyes of Willow Springs burning into his back. When they reached the edge of town, he turned to the auctioneer, who had followed with the bill of sale. "Cut their ropes," Thorn said. The man stared at him. "Are you insane? They'll run." "Cut the ropes," Thorn repeated, his voice dropping to a low growl that promised violence. The man hesitated, then pulled out a knife. "It's your funeral," he muttered and sliced through their bonds. The women rubbed their raw wrists, their silent glances speaking a language of their own. Thorn climbed onto the wagon. "You can ride in the back or walk beside," he told them. "Your choice." After a moment, the woman who spoke English nodded to the others. They climbed into the back of the wagon, their movements stiff and pained. As the wagon rolled out of town, Thorn could still feel Blackwood's stare. It felt like a brand being seared into his skin. The past wasn't just a memory, it was a loaded gun, and Blackwood had his finger on the trigger. The first hour on the trail was silent, broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels. The three women sat in the back, speaking in low Apache whispers that Thorn couldn't understand. He stopped at a creek to water the horses, climbing down to stretch his aching back. The women watched him, their eyes wary. "There's water here," he said, gesturing to the creek. "Drink if you're thirsty." They climbed down slowly, the tallest one positioning herself between him and the others, a silent protector. "My name is Thorn Mason," he said, trying to break the heavy silence. The woman with the perfect English looked up, her dark eyes unreadable. "I am Maya," she said. She gestured to the tall one. "This is Wee Wee," then to the grieving one. "And this is Helona." "You speak English well," Thorn said. "My father was an interpreter for the military," Maya replied, her voice flat, "before they murdered him." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. "I'm sorry," Thorn said, and he meant it. Maya's eyes narrowed as if searching for a lie and finding none. "Why did you buy us?" she asked, the question a sharp stone thrown into the quiet. He couldn't tell her the whole truth. He couldn't tell her that her voice had reminded him of a ghost, that his conscience, long thought dead, had stirred. "I need help on the farm," and he said. "I have 2 children, no wife." Wee Wee spat out a string of angry-sounding Apache. "She asks if you expect us to be your wives," Maya translated, her tone accusing. "No," Thorn said, his voice firm. "Food, shelter, safety, in exchange for work. Nothing more." He paused, meeting her gaze. "And you are not prisoners. You're free to leave, but I can't promise you'll find anything better out there," Maya translated. Wee Wee still looked angry, but Helona, for the first time, looked up from the water, her eyes full of a sorrow so deep it was bottomless. "Wee Wee wants to know why we should trust you," Maya said. "A white man's promise is often a snake in the grass." "It's a fair question," Thorn admitted. "All I have is my word. But I swear on the lives of my children, you will be treated with respect at my farm." Maya translated his oath. The tension in Wee Wee's shoulders eased just a little. "We will come to your farm," Maya said. The words "for now" hung between them, unspoken but understood. The farm wasn't much. A small cabin, a barn that leaned a little to the left, and a few fields of stubborn crops. As they pulled up, the cabin door flew open. It was Luke, rifle in hand, his face a storm of confusion and anger when he saw the women in the back of the wagon. "Pa!" he yelled. "What is this?" "Help for the farm," Thorne said, climbing down. "Put the gun down, son. They're not a threat." Luke lowered the rifle, but his knuckles were white. "They're Apache," he hissed, the word a curse. "Yes," Thorne said, "and they're staying with us." Our Grace appeared in the doorway, behind her brother, her wide eyes full of curiosity, not fear. "Unload the supplies," Thorne told Luke, deliberately turning his back on the women to show his son he trusted them. Luke hesitated, then slammed the rifle against the porch and started unloading, his movements jerky with anger. Maya, Wee Wee, and Helona climbed down, their eyes taking in the small, hardscrabble farm that was now their home. "These ladies are staying with us," Thorne announced to his children. "Maya, Wee Wee, and Helona. They'll help around the place." Luke's jaw tightened. "We don't need help," he muttered. "And you brought—" He lowered his voice. "Them. Into our home. After what they did to the Wilkins family." "That wasn't these women," Thorne said, his voice hard as iron. "And that kind of talk ends now. They are our guests." Luke's face flushed, and he stomped into the house with a sack of flour, leaving a trail of angry silence. Thorne led the women inside. The cabin was one room, sparse but clean. A ladder led to the loft where the children slept. "You can sleep here by the fire," Thorne told them. Wee Wee said something sharp in Apache. "She asks where you will sleep," Maya translated. "In there," Thorne said, nodding to the only other door in the cabin. "My room. You'll have this space to yourselves." Helona, the quiet one, spoke for the first time, her voice a soft whisper. "She asked if the little girl draws," Maya said. "She saw the papers on the table." "All the time," Thorne said. "It's how she talks." "Helona was an artist in our village," Maya explained. "She painted stories on hides." A flicker of an idea sparked in Thorne's mind, a way to bridge the gap between his silent daughter and this grieving woman. "Grace would like to share her supplies," he said. The thought was interrupted by Luke stalking back into the cabin from the barn, his face a thundercloud. "He is angry," Maya observed. "He's a boy who's heard too many stories." Thorne sighed, starting on dinner. "He'll learn." "And you?" Maya asked, her gaze piercing. "You do not fear us?" Thorne paused, the knife still in his hand. "I've learned that most folks are just trying to get by. And right now I have more to fear from the men in that town than I do from 3 women who've been to hell and back." A look of reassessment flickered in Maya's eyes. She said no more, but a small bit of the tension left the room. Dinner was a silent, heavy affair. Luke ate like a starving wolf, his eyes on his plate. The women ate cautiously, as if the food might be poisoned. Only Grace seemed at ease, her curious eyes darting between the 3 strangers. That night Thorne lay on his bed, the door cracked open, listening. He wondered if he'd just signed a death warrant for everyone under his roof. Blackwood's words echoed in his head. 15 years ain't long enough to forget what you are. In the main room, he could hear the soft murmur of Apache voices, a language he hadn't heard in years, a language that brought back memories of a uniform, a battle, and a betrayal. The wound on his head throbbed. The past wasn't just knocking, it had kicked the door in. And as he drifted into an uneasy sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen Maya's eyes before. Not in Willow Springs, but in another place, another lifetime, when he had a different name. Luke lay awake in the loft, his body rigid. Below, the strange, soft language of the Apache women filled the cabin. He couldn't understand what his father was thinking. Had he forgotten what they did to the Wilkins family? Had he forgotten every horror story they'd ever heard? He'd seen the way his father looked at the one called Maya. There was something there, a history Luke didn't understand, and it made his skin crawl. He crept to the edge of the loft and peered through a crack in the floorboards. The 3 women were by the dying fire. The tall one, Wee Wee, sat with her back to the wall, awake and on guard. Helona was curled up, her face still etched with sorrow even in sleep. And Maya. She was staring right into the flames. Suddenly, as if she could feel his eyes on her, she looked up. Her gaze locked directly on the crack in the floorboards, finding him in the darkness. Luke jerked back, his heart hammering in his chest. It was impossible. She couldn't have seen him. But he felt seen right through. His father was hiding something. He'd been hiding it for years. That name he'd whispered in his fever. Elizabeth. It wasn't the first time. Sometimes in the dead of night, his father would cry out that name, his voice thick with a regret so deep it was terrifying. And what about what the sheriff had said? 15 years. Luke had been born 16 years ago. Whatever happened, it was right before he was born. His father never ever spoke of his life before Willow Springs. All Luke knew was that he'd been a soldier, met his mother, and then they came here. But there were clues to a darker story. The ugly scar on his father's side, the nightmares, the way his hand always drifted to his hip when certain men rode by. Luke had always tried to ignore it, but now with 3 Apache strangers sleeping by their fire, the past felt dangerously alive. He made a decision in the dark. Tomorrow he would ride to town. He would find Billy Blackwood, the sheriff's son. Billy had always bragged that he knew secrets about Thorne Mason, secrets that would make a boy's blood run cold. Luke had never wanted to hear them, until now. The first hint of dawn was a pale gray streak in the sky when Thorne rose. He moved quietly, but when he opened his bedroom door, Maya was already awake, tending the fire. Her eyes met his in the dim light. "You sleep light," she said. It wasn't a question. "Old habit," he replied. "Soldier's habit," she corrected. He didn't deny it. As he started the morning coffee, she spoke again. "Your son does not want us here." "Luke's had to grow up too fast," Thorne said, his back to her. "He doesn't trust easy." "And the girl?" "Grace?" Thorne's hand stilled. "She never knew her mother. Catherine died giving birth to her." The silence stretched, filled only by the hiss of the fire. "You called another name in your sleep," Maya said, her voice soft but insistent. "Elizabeth." Thorne's shoulders tensed. "You heard that?" "I was awake," she said simply. The floors creak. He didn't want to have this conversation. "Elizabeth was someone I knew a long time ago," he said, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. "Before Catherine." Maya seemed to understand. She changed the subject. "What work is there to do?" He was relieved. He laid out the chores, cooking, the garden, watching Grace. Maya listened, then nodded. "Wee Wee is strong. She can do heavy work. Helona," she hesitated. "Her spirit is broken. She lost her husband and her child just before we were taken." Thorne knew that kind of pain. "She can work at her own pace," he said. Maya studied him with those searching eyes. "You are not like the men in town." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." The sound of Luke climbing down the ladder cut their conversation short. The boy grabbed a piece of bread and headed for the door without a word. "Where are you going?" Thorne called. "Checking the north pasture fence," Luke said over his shoulder. "Like you wanted." Thorne frowned. The north pasture? That was the furthest part of the farm. The fences there were fine. But before he could argue, Luke was gone, slamming the door behind him. Grace came down next. Her eyes immediately went to Helona, who sat staring into the fire. The little girl walked over and held out a piece of paper. On it was a simple drawing of a woman's face. "Mother," Grace whispered. A ghost of a smile touched Helona's lips. She took the drawing and patted the floor beside her. Grace sat. Helona picked up a piece of charcoal and, with a few deft strokes, transformed the simple sketch, adding life and softness to the eyes. Grace watched, mesmerized. From the doorway, Thorne felt a pang in his chest. It had been so long since he'd seen his daughter connect with anyone. "Helona had a daughter," Maya said quietly from beside him. "She was Grace's age. She was sick for a long time. Helona sang to her every night, even after the child could no longer hear." The words were a knife in his gut. The quiet moment was shattered by the sound of a horse approaching. Fast. Thorne's hand went to the rifle by the door. "Stay inside," he told Maya, and stepped onto the porch. The rider was a dark shape in a cloud of dust. As he got closer, the morning sun glinted off a silver star pinned to his chest. Sheriff Blackwood. He'd come back, and he wasn't waiting for sundown. Blackwood rode into the yard like a storm cloud, his horse kicking up dust. The scar on his face was a livid white line. "Mason," he called, his voice a low snarl, "came for a neighborly visit to see how you're getting on with your new property." "We're doing just fine," Thorne said, his voice level, "and you're not welcome here." "Don't need a welcome to conduct official business," Blackwood sneered. His eyes flickered to Maya, who now stood in the doorway behind Thorne. "Those Apache are military prisoners. I'm here to take them back for questioning." "Funny," Thorne said. "The auctioneer didn't mention that. He just took my money." A muscle jumped in Blackwood's jaw. "I'm taking them back to town, Mason. Now." His hand rested on the butt of his pistol. "No," Thorne said. "You're not." The air crackled. From the corner of his eye, Thorne saw Wee Wee appear at the side of the cabin, a wood axe held in her hands like it was a part of her arm. "You're obstructing justice," Blackwood warned. Maya stepped out onto the porch, her head held high. "We are not property," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "We were stolen from our homes." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Well, aren't you an educated little savage?" he hissed. "Makes you even more valuable." "They've been nowhere near any raids, and you know it," Thorne said. "And how would you know that, Mason?" Blackwood shot back, his eyes gleaming with a sudden, vicious light. "Unless you've been keeping company with them for longer than we thought." The accusation was a poisoned dart, meant to find its mark, but Thorne didn't flinch. "I know because I'm not a fool." Blackwood stared at him for a long, cold moment. "I'll be back," he said finally. "Sundown tomorrow, with more men and papers." He turned his horse. 15 years is a long time to hold a grudge, Mason," he called over his shoulder. "But some debts have to be paid." Thorne watched him ride away, the dust settling in his wake. "What did he mean?" Maya asked from beside him. "About 15 years?" "Old business," Thorne said, his jaw tight. "You and he," Maya said, her eyes searching his face. "Apache Pass." Thorne's head snapped around, his carefully built walls crumbling. "What do you know about Apache Pass?" Before she could answer, Luke came running from the barn. "Pa, was that the sheriff?" Thorne pulled himself together. "Yes, I thought I told you to check the north pasture." "I was seeing to the horses," Luke said, his eyes darting between his father and Maya. "What did he want?" "Trouble," Thorne said. "He's coming back tomorrow. For them." Luke's face was unreadable. "Maybe that's for the best," he said quietly. "They don't belong here." "They're staying," Thorne said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now go check those fences." For a second, Luke looked like he was going to defy him. "Why are you doing this, Pa?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Risking everything for them?" Thorne's anger faded, replaced by a weariness that went bone deep. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said, "and I've spent too long doing nothing. Now go." Luke stared at him, a war of emotions on his young face, then turned and stalked away. "Your son needs answers," Maya said softly. "As do I." "Answers don't always help," Thorne replied, watching his son's rigid back. "Sometimes they just open old wounds." "And sometimes," Maya said, her voice like a prophecy, "a wound has to be opened before it can heal." Luke saddled his horse, his hands clumsy with anger. His father was insane, risking their lives, their farm, everything, for three strangers. It didn't make any sense. Unless there was more to the story. The name Elizabeth, the sheriff's threat, the strange, silent understanding between his father and Maya. He had to know. He swung onto his horse and kicked it into a run, taking the back trail to Willow Springs. He had to get to Billy Blackwood. The ride gave him too much time to think. Billy was 2 years older, a swaggering bully who ran with a rough crowd. He'd always hinted that he knew things about Thorne Mason. Luke had never wanted to listen. Now he was desperate to hear the lies. He found Billy lounging by the stables, a cigarette dangling from his lip. "Well, well," Billy drawled. "Look what the wind blew in. What brings you to town, farm boy?" I need to talk to you, Luke said, his voice tight. Alone. Billy smirked but waved his friends away. What's so important? Your father came to our farm, Luke said, getting straight to it. Said something about 15 years ago. Billy's eyes lit up. So the old man finally made his move. Took him long enough. What happened? Luke demanded. Between our fathers. Billy leaned in, savoring the moment. You really don't know, do you? About Apache Pass? About how your pa got that scar on his side? Luke shook his head, a cold dread coiling in his gut. He doesn't talk about the past. I bet he doesn't, Billy laughed, a mean, sharp sound. Not when he's a damn deserter and a traitor. What are you talking about? 15 years ago, Billy began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Your pa and my pa were soldiers. Your father was a captain. They tracked some Apache raiders to a pass. But when they found the camp, your father lost his nerve. Said there were women and children. Wouldn't give the order to attack. That's not desertion, Luke said, his throat dry. I'm getting to that, Billy sneered. My pa, he tried to take command. Do what needed to be done. And your father pulled a gun on him. On his own man. There was a fight. Your pa got wounded, but he escaped. Ran off and hid with the Apache. When he finally showed his face again, he had a new name and a new wife. Your ma. Luke felt the world tilt on its axis. That can't be true. Ask him, Billy shrugged. And while you're at it, ask him about Elizabeth Blackwood, my aunt, the woman he was engaged to marry before he ran off and shacked up with your mother. Elizabeth. The name was a punch to the gut, the ghost in his father's nightmares. You're lying, Luke whispered, but the words had no force. Am I? Billy smiled, a predator's grin. Then why'd he bring home 3 Apache squaws yesterday? Why's he willing to die for them? Maybe one of them's the one who patched him up after he ran. Maybe he's been working with them all along. Luke stumbled back, the poisonous words ringing in his ears. My father's a good man. Your father is a traitor, Billy said flatly. And my pa is coming for him tomorrow. You better pick a side, Mason. Luke turned and fled, Billy's laughter chasing him down the dusty street. He rode home in a daze, the story churning in his mind. It couldn't be true, but it explained everything. The nightmares, the secrets, the name Elizabeth, and now the 3 women who had brought the past crashing down around them. Who was this man he called father? And when the sheriff came tomorrow, whose side was he on? While Luke was in town having his world torn apart, Thorne was working the fields, trying to sweat out the poison of Blackwood's visit. He didn't see Maya coming until her shadow fell over him. Your son has gone to town, she said. Thorne straightened up, his back screaming in protest. He's supposed to be on the north pasture. He took a horse an hour ago, she said. The back trail. Thorne swore under his breath. Billy Blackwood. He knew that's where Luke was headed. He knew the lies the sheriff's son would be spinning. He started for the house. He had to be ready when Luke got back. The sheriff's son? Maya asked, falling into step beside him. He'll be filling the boy's head with lies, Thorne said grimly. Or twisted versions of the truth, Maya corrected, which can be far more dangerous. They walked in silence for a moment, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the dry earth. You were there, Thorne said suddenly. It wasn't a question. At Apache Pass. I was there, she confirmed. He stopped, turning to face her. Then it was you. You were the one who found me. After Blackwood left me for dead. I found a wounded soldier who had tried to stop his men from murdering women and children, she said, her eyes meeting his. I didn't know your name. I only knew you were different. The memory was a fever dream, a cave, pain, and a young woman's face, her hands gentle as she tended his wounds, her voice a soft song that kept him tethered to the living world. The same woman who stood before him now. You saved my life, he whispered. And now you have bought mine, she replied. Perhaps the circle is now complete. It's not over, Thorne said, shaking his head. Blackwood won't stop. He's let this hate fester for 15 years. He won't stop until he's destroyed me. Then we will be ready for him, Maya said. But your son deserves to know the truth. From you, before he hears Blackwood's version and believes it. He knew she was right, but the thought of telling Luke everything, of seeing the judgment in his son's eyes, filled him with a cold dread. "I'll tell him," he said finally, "when he gets back." Maya nodded. "Good. Now, we prepare. Blackwood is bringing men. They will not be coming to talk." Luke returned in the late afternoon, his face a tight mask of stone. Thorne met him on the porch. "We need to talk, son." Luke's eyes, so like his mother's, wouldn't meet his. "About what? About how you've lied to me my entire life?" Thorne led him to the barn, away from the women. "What did Billy Blackwood tell you?" he asked. Luke exploded. "He told me you were a deserter, that you abandoned your men, that you were engaged to his aunt Elizabeth before you ran off with Ma." Thorne took the volley of accusations without flinching. "Some of that is true, huh?" he said quietly. "But not the way Billy told it. Will you let me tell you my side?" Luke's jaw was tight, but he nodded. Thorne took a deep breath. 15 years ago, my name was Captain Thomas Monroe. I was stationed at Fort Bowie. Lieutenant Daniel Blackwood was my second in command. We tracked a group of Apache to a pass. Blackwood said it was a war party, but when we got there, it was just families. Women, children, old men. I ordered my men to stand down. His voice grew hard. Blackwood ignored my order. He told the men to open fire. "Did they?" Luke asked, his voice small. "Some did," Thorne said grimly. "I tried to stop them. I drew my weapon. Blackwood came at me with a knife. He stabbed me in the side. The last thing I remember is him standing over me, telling the men I was a traitor." "What happened then?" "I should have died," Thorne said, "but someone found me. A young Apache woman. She took me to a cave and saved my life." He looked his son straight in the eye. "That woman was Maya." Luke's eyes went wide. "That's why you bought her? Because she saved you?" "Partly," Thorne admitted. "By the time I recovered, Blackwood had already branded me a deserter. There was a price on my head. I couldn't go back. So I went east. I met your mother. I took her name, Mason, and we came back out here, as far from Fort Bowie as we could get." "And Elizabeth?" Luke asked. "Billy said you were engaged to her." A shadow passed over Thorne's face. "Yes, we were. She was Blackwood's sister. When I was reported as a deserter, I couldn't contact her. I couldn't explain." "So you just left her," Luke accused. "I mourned her," Thorne said. "But I loved your mother, Luke. Never, ever doubt that." "Why didn't you tell me?" Luke asked, his voice breaking. "At first for safety," Thorne explained. "Then, after your mother died, it just seemed easier to let the past stay buried." "And now Blackwood is coming," Luke challenged. "What happens to us?" "I don't know," Thorne admitted. "But I can't let him take them. Not after what he did. Not when I know what he'll do to them." Luke stared at his father as if seeing him for the first time. "So you're willing to risk our lives for them? For something that happened 15 years ago?" "Not just for them," Thorne said. "For what's right. For the man I should have been all along. I've spent 15 years running, Luke. It's time to stand my ground." Luke didn't answer. The silence in the barn was thick with unspoken words. "I need to think," he said finally and turned for the door. "Blackwood comes tomorrow at sundown," Thorne said to his back. "I need to know where you stand." Luke paused, his hand on the latch. "Do you regret it?" he asked without turning. "Standing against him that day?" "I regret that I couldn't stop him," Thorne said. "I regret the lives that were lost. But I don't regret refusing to take part in a massacre. Some lines you don't cross, not even in a war." Luke nodded once, a small, tight movement, and slipped out the door, leaving Thorne alone with the ghosts of his past. That night, the cabin was a tinderbox of tension. Luke stayed up in the loft, a silent, brooding presence. Thorne stepped out onto the porch, needing the cold night air to clear his head. Maya followed him out. "Your son is troubled," she said. "He has a right to be," Thorne replied. His world just fell apart. They stood in silence, watching the stars ignite in the black sky. "This woman," Maya said suddenly. "Elizabeth, do you still love her?" The question ambushed him. "I don't know," he answered honestly. The man who loved her died at Apache Pass. And what does the man who survived want? She asked. Peace, he said. A chance to stop running. He looked at her. What about you? What do you want? Home, she said simply. A place where we can be safe. Her smile faded. Our people, there is not much to go back to. Many were killed that day. The rest were forced onto the reservation. It is a place of sickness and death. The weight of his failure at Apache Pass crashed down on him. I'm sorry, he whispered, for all of it. You tried, she said, her eyes meeting his. When others were killing, you tried to stop it. That is why I saved you then, and that is why I trust you now. In that moment, something shifted between them, a connection that had nothing to do with debts or gratitude. It was something new, something fragile, and something that terrified him. The door opened. It was Grace. Papa, she said, Helona wants to show you something. Inside, Helona had drawn a map on a piece of scrap paper. It was a detailed map of the hills around their farm. She knows this land, Maya translated. Her people hunted here. Helona pointed to a spot on the map. She says there is a cave here, a good place to hide the children if there is fighting. Thorne memorized the location. From the loft above, he knew Luke was listening. They spent the rest of the night preparing, barricading windows, stocking water, and planning for a fight they knew they couldn't win. High above them, in the dark, Luke weighed his father's sins against his father's honor and tried to decide which was heavier. The moon was a cold, silver eye in the sky. Thorne couldn't sleep. He stood on the porch, the silence of the night a heavy blanket. Maya came out and stood beside him. I remember you singing, Thorne said, his voice low. In the cave. I didn't understand the words, but your voice, it kept me from letting go. I won't. It was a healing song, Maya said softly. I was not sure you would live. Why did you help me? He asked. I was the enemy. I saw you try to stop the killing, she said. You were wounded because you tried to protect the innocent. Such a man deserved to live. Her words were a balm on a 15-year-old wound. He had failed, but he had tried, and to her that had mattered. He turned to face her. In the moonlight, her face was soft, her eyes full of stars. Maya, he began, not knowing what he would say. We face danger tomorrow. She cut him off gently. What comes after is a question for another night. She touched his arm. Do not carry this weight alone, she whispered and went back inside. He stayed on the porch for a long time, the future a terrifying, unknown country. But for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something that wasn't quite hope, but was close enough. He was no longer facing it alone. The dawn brought with it a cold, clear finality. This was the day. They ate a silent breakfast. Luke came down from the loft, his face pale but resolute. Pa, he said when they were alone, I'm still trying to understand everything. But when Blackwood comes, I stand with you, with our family. Relief hit Thorne so hard his knees nearly buckled. Thank you, son, he said, his voice thick. They spent the morning fortifying the cabin, boarding windows, cleaning rifles. By mid-afternoon, the farm was a small, doomed fortress. If shooting starts, Thorne told Grace and Helona, you run for the cave. Don't wait. He turned to Maya. You'll be his main target. Stay down. I will stand with you, she said, her jaw set. Before he could argue, Luke shouted from the window. Someone's coming! A single rider, coming fast! It was too early for Blackwood. Thorne stepped onto the porch, his rifle ready. The rider thundered into the yard, a woman with her hair flying loose, her face streaked with dust and tears. Thomas, she cried, her voice a ghost from a buried life. They're coming. Daniel and his men. They're drunk, and they're talking about burning you out. They're talking about a hanging. 15 years vanished. The lines on her face, the gray in her hair. They didn't matter. He knew her. Elizabeth, he breathed. The world stopped spinning. Elizabeth Blackwood, the woman he was supposed to marry, the ghost from his nightmares standing in his yard. How did you find me? He managed to ask. I've always known where you were, Thomas, she said, her voice ragged. Daniel talks when he's drunk. I pieced it together. I know what he did at Apache Pass. I know he lied. Her eyes, the same impossible blue he remembered, were filled with a desperate urgency. He's gathered a mob from the saloon. 20 men. They mean to kill you all. Behind him, Luke gasped. This was the woman whose name had haunted their family for years. Come inside, Thorne said, his mind racing. As they stepped into the cabin, Maya moved forward, her face a cool, unreadable mask. This is Maya, Thorne said, the introduction hanging awkwardly in the air. They're the reason your brother is coming. I know, Elizabeth said. She looked at Grace, her expression softening. And this must be your daughter. Her gaze met Thorne's, a universe of unspoken pain passing between them. She has Catherine's eyes. How much time do we have? Maya asked, cutting through the tension. An hour, maybe less, Elizabeth said. Thorne looked around the small fortified cabin. We can't fight 20 men, he said. Not here. He looked at Maya. The cave. Can it hold all of us? Maya spoke with Helona, then nodded. Yes. We'll have to split up, Thorne decided. Maya, you take Grace and Helona on the East Trail. Luke, you and Wee Wee take the North Ridge. Elizabeth and I will create a diversion, then follow the creek bed. Maya's eyes narrowed. The creek is the most exposed route. It's also the fastest, Thorne said. He didn't say that it also allowed him to keep Elizabeth, a woman whose motives he still couldn't entirely trust, with him. They had 15 minutes. As the others scrambled to pack, Elizabeth pulled him aside. Thomas, she whispered, Daniel doesn't just want the women. He thinks you have something. A letter from the commander at Fort Bowie. A letter that proves what Daniel did that day. There is no letter, Thorne said, his blood running cold. He believes there is, she insisted. He's obsessed. He thinks you've been waiting all these years to destroy him. He's insane. Yes, she said, her face grim. And an insane man with 20 armed drunks behind him is the most dangerous thing in this territory. Luke appeared at his side, a pack on his back and rifle in hand. We're ready, Pa. Then it's time to go, Thorne said. The cave is the meeting point. No one waits for anyone. Go. As the two groups melted into the landscape, Thorne turned to Elizabeth. The distant sound of horses was already on the wind. Ready? He asked. She nodded, her face strangely calm. Ready. They stepped out onto the porch just as the mob appeared on the horizon, a dark, ugly wave of men. Thorne fired a warning shot into the air. Let's give them a show, he said. They fired a few more shots, wide of the mark, making it look like they were dug in for a siege. Then they slipped out the back and ran for the cover of the creek bed. Behind them, the mob opened fire on the empty cabin. They'll figure it out soon, Thorne panted as they scrambled over the rocks. The gunfire behind them stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. They know, Elizabeth said. They're coming. Up this side canyon, Thorne said. It leads to the cave. You go, she said suddenly. I'll keep following the creek. I'll draw them away. No, Thorne said. We stay together. Be practical, Thomas, she insisted. They're after you. I can buy you the time you need. And when they catch you, he demanded, what will your brother do then? A sad, strange smile touched her lips. Daniel won't hurt me. And then the world fell away. I'm dying, Thomas, she said, her voice quiet but steady. The doctors gave me 6 months, maybe less. I couldn't let my last act on this earth be letting my brother murder the only good man I ever knew. The sound of horses was closer now. Go, she urged, pushing him toward the canyon. Your children need you. Maya needs you. She took his hat and coat. In this light, they'll think I'm you. He stared at her, his heart breaking for the life they never had, for the woman she was. Live well, Thomas, she said. Make this second chance count. And then she was gone, running down the creek bed, a lone, brave figure against the dying light. He watched her for a moment, then turned and began the desperate climb toward the cave, his lungs burning, his mind screaming her name. He found them in the cave, huddled in the darkness. Where's Miss Elizabeth? Luke asked, his voice tight with fear. She's buying us time, Thorne said, his own voice hollow. The night passed in a long, tense vigil. As the stars wheeled overhead, Thorne sat with Maya at the mouth of the cave. She told me she was dying. he said softly. This was her choice. Her last gift to us was time. And what will you do with it? Maya asked. He looked at her face a beautiful, strong silhouette against the starlight. I'm starting to see a way forward, he said, if you're willing to walk it with me. First, she replied, her voice practical but not unkind, we must survive tomorrow. Dawn broke, cold and gray. They had to make a decision. Run for the next town or head for the reservation? San Carlos is no sanctuary, Maya said. It is a place of death. Then we run, Thorne said. We stop running, a voice said from the mouth of the cave. It was Elizabeth. She was exhausted, torn and dirty, but she was alive. I lost them in a box canyon 10 miles south, she said, taking a long drink of water. But running is no answer. Daniel will never stop hunting you, not as long as he thinks you have the letter. The letter that doesn't exist, Thorne sighed. But what if it did? Elizabeth said, her eyes burning with a sudden, fierce light. My brother is a monster, Thomas. It's time someone put him down. She reached into her jacket. And I have something that might help. It was a real letter, one she'd stolen from her brother's desk years ago. In it, Blackwood bragged to a superior officer about taking necessary action at Apache Pass after his captain hesitated. It's not a confession, Elizabeth said, but with my testimony and Maya's, it might be enough, Thorne finished. Enough to make people ask questions. He looked at Maya, at his children. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach. But something else was there too, a resolve. We go back, he said. We go back to Willow Springs and we face him with the truth. There's more, Elizabeth said. The territorial marshal is due in town today. If we can get to him before Daniel does. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was better than running. They rode into Willow Springs not as fugitives, but as a family. Thorne rode at the front, his head held high. The townspeople stared, their faces a mixture of shock and contempt. And there, outside the sheriff's office, stood three men. Blackwood, his face a mask of pure rage. A tall, silver-haired man with a marshal's badge. And to Thorne's astonishment, Pastor Thomas from the town church. Mason, Blackwood roared. You're under arrest for desertion. Why? My name, Thorne said, his voice ringing through the silent street, is Captain Thomas Monroe, and I have never deserted my men. Elizabeth stepped forward, holding out the letter. Marshal, she said, I believe you'll find this interesting. The marshal read the letter, his face grim. Blackwood started to bluster, to deny everything. He's lying, he screamed, pointing at Thorne. And she's a savage. Their words mean nothing. And what about my words, Sheriff? Pastor Thomas said, his quiet voice cutting through the rage. Every head turned. I was Corporal Peterson, the pastor said, his eyes finding Thorne's. I was at Apache Pass, and I can no longer live with the sin of my silence. He turned to the marshal and began to speak. He told them everything, the orders, the massacre, the captain who tried to stop it, and the lieutenant who left him for dead. When he was done, the street was dead silent. Blackwood, his face ashen, reached for his gun. I wouldn't, the marshal said, his voice like ice. And just like that, it was over. Daniel Blackwood, the tyrant of Willow Springs, was a broken man. The marshal took Thorne's statement and Maya's and the pastor's. He promised a full inquiry. He promised Thorne his name would be cleared. He promised Maya and her sisters protection and freedom. As they walked toward the church, where the pastor had offered them sanctuary, Elizabeth fell into step beside Thorne. What we had, she said softly, her eyes on Maya walking ahead with grace, was beautiful, but it belongs to the past. You have a future, Thomas. Go live it. Luke came up beside him. Is it really over, Pa? Can we go home? Soon, son, Thorne promised. And they'll come with us? Maya and the others? They're family now, right? Thorne looked at Maya, who had slowed her pace to walk beside him. That's their choice to make, he said, but his eyes were asking a question. Your name is Thomas, she said. It suits you. It'll take some getting used to, he smiled. Perhaps, she suggested, you can be both, the man you were and the man you have become." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I've been given a second chance," he said, "and I find myself hoping that you might want to build it with me." She studied his face for a long moment. Then a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. A smile that reached her eyes and lit up the world. "I would like that," she said. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was a beginning. For $6 silver, Thorne had bought back his honor, his future, and a family he never knew he was looking for. It was the best damn bargain he had ever made. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption and want to hear more tales from the strange and mysterious corners of the world, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out and ensures you won't miss what's coming next. Thanks for listening.